have a story of a miracle. We like to think of miracles like mothers lifting cars off of their young, or people being raised from the dead, or blind eyes being opened, and those are all miracle things. But what's really a miracle is that God can take somebody who's stuck in this world and turn their life around and set them onto a path for victory. Not just surviving, but thriving. And God can do that for each and every one of us. So it's wonderful to come and hear stories of that. So without further ado, I am going to invite Kay to come up. Let's welcome Kay to the stage, and I'll let her actually introduce herself.
Hi, everybody. My name is Kay, and I am a grateful believer who loves Jesus. I celebrate recovery, 14 years from drunkenness, but I still struggle with a sober mind. And I have issues that I still deal with in regard to PTSD and anxiety and codependency and foreboding. That's a big one. My name means rejoice, and there was a time in my life when I thought that that was just a cruel joke from God. It's like, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? Rejoice? About what? Over what? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read off of my cards, and then I'm going to make a timeline here on the floor to kind of give you a perspective. I was born into a very broken and dysfunctional family. The trauma started before I was even old enough to remember it, but I still believe that it settled upon my soul and psyche even then. My parents, both previously married, brought together this broken Brady bunch of a family. They had kids from both sides, and then all of a sudden I came along unexpectedly and unwanted. I had brothers and sisters 15 to 20 years older than me. In fact, I have 3 sisters I've never met. And here I was, thrown into the mix of all of this mess. My first memory was at 3 years old. I heard the fighting from my attic bedroom. Yes, I was 3, and I was in the attic. It was okay, though. I had a window, and that window faced sunset and the woods. And if there's a few people in here who know me, you know I love the woods. And I love sunset, and I think, or sunrise and sunset, and I think it came from this time in that attic. The fight downstairs was escalating, as was always the case. But I kept my eyes on the sky, choosing, even at 3, to see the beauty instead of hearing the ugly going on downstairs. When it quieted down, I waited a little bit before tiptoeing my little 3-year-old self down the stairs. Dad was nowhere to be found. But I screamed when I saw my mother. She was in her avocado green recliner, hello 60s, and she was drunk, passed out. But that chair, it was on fire. And I don't mean smoldering, I mean it was on fire from her cigarettes. So I ran to the basement, which I was terrified of, and I hollered for my brothers, whom I were terrified of. And they came running, and they dragged Mom from the chair, and then they threw that chair out onto the front yard. And I remember standing there in the chaos from the porch, just watching as my brothers were trying to revive my mom. And I watched that chair burn with sunset behind it. And I remember the thought that came for me, even though I was only 3. And it is a thought that has stuck with me all up until now. I am not safe. Fear unlocked at a very high level for me at just age 3, and the lies of an enemy began forming the pathway in my young head that would rut my brain for a lifetime. Set that right there. That's the beginning of the timeline. When that marriage ended, both parents immediately remarried, and my brothers and I went to live with my mom with her new husband and his boys. If I thought fear was a thing before, it was about to escalate in this new gang family. Drugs, alcohol, knives, guns, Chinese stars, neighborhood gang violence, and motorcycle clubs became my new normal, and I was constantly terrified. Mostly forgotten and neglected, I learned quickly how to try to remain that way, invisible. Because when I wasn't invisible, very bad things happened. I'd hear the motorcycles roll up, and I knew it was time to hide. I'd hear the music in the basement start, and I knew it was time to hide. I'd smell the incense that was trying to cover the smell of the drugs downstairs, and I'd try to hide. And when I didn't hide, I ran. We lived on a dead-end street, and the woods were just behind our house, so I would run there, hoping for glimpses of that sunset to calm my nerves. I was aged 3 to 9 in this new family, where my new stepbrothers sexually molested me. Parties led to finding fun in torturing and abusing the little girl upstairs. And gatherings that led to fights brought different gangs and different motorcycle clubs, always followed by the police. And neglect, it was on many levels. And it was brutally real, all of it. Often before any gathering they had escalated, they would also use me as target practice for their knives and for their Chinese stars. I would have to stand against the garage spread eagle and let them just hurl their weapons at me to practice. And I have the scars all over my body to prove it. I'd go into the house to care for my own wounds, as Mom and Stepdad were also either gone or they were also passed out and drunk themselves. And so this small child also learned quickly that fear would always come for me, and the people who were supposed to love me best didn't. Love wasn't real. Monsters were. And they hurt and wounded a little girl and did things that I don't need to give you details on. If you have read books or watched movies or the news, I'm sure you can imagine. And if you can imagine it, it happened to me. And it was violent. So violent, I couldn't even hear the sound of a motorcycle. Up until this year, without panic coursing through my body. As I mentioned, I was often so neglected I didn't get fed. My Easy Bake Oven, it was a child's toy, but for me it wasn't. That was just how I warmed up food, and it seemed normal. Didn't every little girl use their Easy Bake Oven to just eat and warm up food? But it also created something else in me, a little thief, because I would have to sneak into the kitchen to try to find anything I could to put through that Easy Bake Oven, because no one remembered to feed me. I would grab bologna or marshmallows or graham crackers or even just white bread with some mayonnaise on it, and I'd put it through that oven, and it became a comfort. When I started stealing for it, I would go to a friend's house to play, but I would come home with food that I stole from their kitchen. Or I would sneak down to when the music had stopped in the basement, and I would steal the food from the motorcycle guys down there. I would put it through my Easy Bake Oven before crawling into bed under a pile of stuffed animals who I was sure kept me safe and hidden. The month of August, at age almost 9, because my birthday is in August, my brother committed suicide in our basement with a gun to his head. I was the only one home. A week later, another brother overdosed and died in our basement, and I was the only one home. Another, in a 1% motorcycle club, was brutally beaten nearly to death. And then, to avoid going to prison himself, he became an undercover informant against his own club. And he put us all in danger by doing that. I'm sure you can imagine, if you've seen movies, the repercussions of that. Another brother, addicted to heroin, came home from the Marines overseas, but he chose to stay in his addiction, becoming very violent and very abusive to his little sister, and eventually leaving to become homeless by choice. He did it on purpose because the drugs and the violence had begun to mean more to him than a roof. Fear was so intense, I can't even explain it to you. I was 8, almost 9. And then, when you just think nothing could get any worse, my mom died. At her funeral, my stepdad swooped me up, leaned me over her casket, and said, "Kiss her goodbye. And then we're going home to pack your things." I fought him as best as I could, leaning over her, trying to avoid the kiss that he was demanding, but he literally pressed me into her. And then, as promised, he whisked me off to home to get my things because my real dad was coming to pick me up. At home, he threw 2 black garbage bags at me and said, "Fill these and go sit on the front porch and wait." The bedroom door closed, and I looked around my room as a new feeling filled me. Not fear this time, hate. Hate so profound it felt tangible. I had just turned 9, and my mom lay in a casket. My fear-filled life telling me I was unloved, not safe, unwanted, and that everyone leaves. Everyone who were supposed to love you leaves. And hate just filled me. Love did not exist. Safe was a fallacy. Hate, it felt like the only power I could hang on to in that moment, and I locked onto it. Looking back now, though, I wish I could hug that brave little girl and just tell her it was going to be okay. I wish I could tell her that she would come to know love. Dad's family was where I learned about God, but he was wrapped in religion and rules and going to church every time the door opened. They sang songs like Jesus Loves Me, but then later at home, I would get a beating when I got in trouble. And trust me, I got in trouble. Cable bike locks wrapped in plastic sheathing were the favorite weapon of choice for these beatings. They were always used in a dark bedroom or in the back of a camper where the welts that were being left could not be seen. And I never cried. I just took it. I was tough. I took knives. I could take a bike lock. But I let the hate deepen. Love was a farce. Fear was real. And monsters were still alive, even in a house that spoke of God. And the dark, it became a nemesis. I got to where I couldn't be in the dark without overwhelming panic taking me to memories of those monsters. My Easy Bake Oven had long been confiscated, but food still calmed me, still comforted me. And that was the one thing that wasn't lacking here in this house. I was fed. But I was often condemned for eating too much. And once the condemnation started on that, well, they found a whole lineup of all of the ways that I was wrong, or I was bad, or I was messed up. So, enter shame. Shame was new to me, but I let her in too, and she took up residency with her sisters, fear and hate. I think I scared Dad and Stepmom. None of the things I had lived through or gone through or been through were ever spoken of, though. They were just ignored and swept under a rug and pretend that it wasn't there or that it didn't happen. I was a broken, hot mess at age 9. And remember, if you will, what that month for me had already held. Suicide, overdose, escalated gang fears, brother coming home addicted and homeless, and my own mother's death, and a birthday. It was a lot. And it was too much for a child of 9. But naturally, wouldn't it make sense to send this child away to a Christian camp for the rest of the summer? Right? Wouldn't that make sense? This little screwed up mess, let's send her off to camp. So that's what they did. Just another form of sweeping it under the rug. I think in their own way, they were trying to help. I can look back now from my own healing and place of recovery and compassionately see that they were just doing their best with what they knew at the time. That compassion, by the way, that's God working in my life. That is not me. That's Him doing something new. So here I was at camp. Like I said, a hot mess. Depressed, like I don't even know how to stand up here and explain to you that a child could be. And it was the middle of the night, my nemesis, and I was on the top bunk. And I took out a razor blade that I had found, and I began cutting my wrist. At 9. At 9, I knew the way to cut a wrist to die. And if you ask me how I know, I will deny it. But I knew, and I still bear those scars. Fortunately, because I was 9, it hurt too bad. And I stopped. I couldn't do it. But my counselor found me crying and covered in blood, and so I was sent back home. Again, home. There were no words. There was no help. Just lift the corner of the rug and sweep it back under there. Fear, hate, shame, and now foreboding. Do you remember I mentioned that word at the beginning of my introduction? Foreboding seemed to be a new companion. I was going to have to live, and life was always going to have to be this way. I couldn't even kill myself. I was just going to have to deal with it. I resigned to it, though, and I let the gang of fear, hate, and shame take on this new member, foreboding. Foreboding is the belief that life is always going to come for you in some terrible way, and there's nothing you can ever do about it. Skip ahead to age 16. I knew God. I'd learned about him in this home. And I had asked him to come into my heart, and I knew what that meant. So we had a relationship, but as you can imagine, it was complicated. And it was winter in Michigan, where I grew up, northern Michigan. And I was home alone one evening. We lived in the middle of nowhere, and I heard the front door rattling. Someone was trying to break in. We were a hunting family, and Dad had us all pros at using guns. I knew where they were and how to use them, and so I ran for one before grabbing the phone off of the wall. Did you guys hear that? Off the wall? Off the wall and extend it like 20 feet with the cord. I called the cops, and when I got them on the phone, they told me to hide. They didn't understand. I was done hiding. I screamed at the front door that someone was trying to break in through, and I yelled that if they came in, I would shoot them. The dispatcher on the floor was freaking out. I could hear her screaming and begging me to go hide. The front door opened, and I pulled the trigger. The guy screamed as he fled, and I unloaded the gun into the ground. Not trying to hit him, although I could have. And the hate that had bottled up for so long suddenly scared me. I could have killed him. I could have. And it terrified me. I dropped to my knees in my living room, grateful I had unloaded that gun into the ground and not his back. And I cried out, God, if you're real, help me. Help me. It was my first plea. A week later, a family member had me by the hair on either side of my head, banging my head against the refrigerator because I had been mouthy. Just before I felt myself begin to pass out, I screamed no, and I threw my arms up, breaking free from the grip. I punched them so hard that they fell back against the counter and nearly hit the floor. Then I stepped up to them, and with my finger in their face, I said, if you ever touch me again, I'll kill you. I walked away. The words that I spoke, again, terrified me. Would I? It felt true. This hate was so big. What was I capable of? I ran to the woods, crying out again, God, if you're real, help me. And it was my second plea. Another week later, Thanksgiving Day, festivities were in full swing with aunts and uncles and cousins, but my dad was on a hunting trip in Montana. Then came the knock on the door. Long story short, Dad died while he was in Montana hunting. I grabbed my Bible from the bed and I ran out to the woods, his hunting blind to be exact, and I cried out to God again, what was this life? What was this life? And new devils unlocked. Fear, hate, shame, foreboding, and now, alone. My dad was the only one in my life that had ever made me feel safe, ever. And he was the only one who made me feel that I could be loved in some ways. He was really my only person, imperfect as he was. And now, he was gone. It was as if the devil was affirming for me again that he could get to me anytime, anywhere, in any way, and there was nothing I could do about it. Obviously, not only was safety and love a farce, but God must be too. This is long, so I'll spare you the drama of the rest of my childhood and teen years, but suffice it to say, from a 1% motorcycle gang family to a religious family not helping me heal, I was a very broken person. And I was struggling to believe God. I felt I had been dealt a hand by humans, and now also by God. I questioned not only his existence, but also my own. Every day I wanted to die. But somehow, one thing through it all that I never let go of was hope. I don't know how, but somehow I always hoped. And I think it's what saved me. I think hope is what kept me until I could find Jesus in a personal way in college. There, I decided I'd give him a real try. I would get to know him for myself, not as churches or religions were trying to tell me he was, but for myself, through my own study in word and through prayer. And you know what I discovered? I liked him. I liked him a lot. I liked this radical Jesus, and I saw radical as a way of life, being radical, and he thought he brought it to life in a new way. So I dedicated my life to him. I began working in camps for underprivileged and abused kids, helping in homeless shelters, prisons, jails, and recovery homes. Wherever I could pour out to other broken people just like myself, I threw myself into it. I was certain that they needed hope too. They were, after all, my people. I knew them. I was on fire and loving every minute of it, but I still hadn't healed from all of my traumas. They were still all under that rug. So, when the circumstances of my senior year of college had the bottom falling out again, I went to a very dark place again. I was working at a gas station convenience store, third shift, when a guy come running in the store wearing a ski mask in May. Now, it's cold in Michigan in May, but not for a ski mask. So my spidey senses from growing up with gang family just kind of went into overdrive and kicked into high alert. And before he even got to me in my register, I knew what he drove. I knew the color of his skin, the color of his eyes, and the color of his hair. I knew to look around the eye holes and the wrist of his sleeves, even though he thought he had them covered. I also knew from the glance at that wrist that he had some sort of tattoo. And I gauged his height by the marking on the door he came through. When he got to me and told me to open the register, he pushed my head down toward it and he stabbed his knife into the back of my neck. I didn't panic. Remember, I knew knives. I had already pressed the alarm also that was under the rug that I was standing on. And so instead of panicking, I did what I always do. I got mouthy. Go figure. So I said, listen, if you're going to stab me, you better kill me, because I will be able to ID you in a lineup. And in case you haven't noticed, those sirens that you hear, they're coming for you. He looked out the window and realized the cops were coming, so he opened the register himself, took the money, and as he shoved me to the floor, he stabbed me again. Long story short, because of surgeries, I couldn't finish my classes in college, and I flunked one of them. Didn't allow me to get my diploma. 4.5 years of college, and a guy stabs me and I can't get my diploma. I could walk in graduation, the school said, but no diploma until I retook that class. Come back next semester for it. You won't have to pay for it again, but you do have to retake it. But here was the problem. I thought I was graduating. I had nowhere to live, and my financial aid was done, and there was no family to go home to. I had been given an opportunity that I thought was what I wanted to do with the rest of my life, which was be a park ranger at the Blue Ridge Mountain Parkway. And I couldn't go. And because I couldn't go that summer and I had to finish school the next semester, they didn't want me to come. So I lost my dream. I lost what I had gone to school for 4.5 years. My friends were also all leaving that area. I had no family to go home to. So that summer, I became the unhoused. I became the homeless, living in my car. I slept in Walmart parking lots and church parking lots and anywhere that felt remotely safe. And then I would climb into the back seat with a bottle of alcohol, a pile of my clothes, and all the things that I could pile on top of me to hide. And I looked for comfort in the bottle. 21 and homeless. And I was trying to find comfort in the bottom of a bottle. I wanted to believe God and have hope. But man, that bottle sure helped me forget. At 23, I married. And 3 months later, I found myself unexpectedly pregnant. And my husband told me his life was ruined. He had all these plans in place to be a pilot, and an unexpected child was going to ruin all of that. I was devastated, and yet I stayed. 16 years and 2 beautiful children later, I stayed. I stayed because it was what I was supposed to do as this good Christian woman I had become. I stayed because I had vows and I was told till death do you part. Then his actions began to change even more, and he became very violent. And without going into private details, I realized I couldn't stay. My pastor even said at that point, Kay, there has been a death. You're dead to him. And if you stay, you may truly become dead. And so the proceedings started, and we both agreed we weren't meant to be together. It was also during this time we found out that he had Huntington's disease. Now, if you don't know, Huntington's disease is like having Alzheimer's, ALS, Parkinson's, all at the same time. It's often seen as schizophrenia too, and this is the area that was presenting more with my husband. Not knowing all that we know now about this rare degenerative brain disease, we went ahead and proceeded with the divorce. But because we knew some things about the disease, we also knew that for him, out of sight would be out of mind. I had 2 children at risk for Huntington's disease because it's a genetic disease. And so I made the hardest decision of my life. Some called me names that I won't share here, and told me I was the worst mother ever. How could a good mom leave her kids? But I knew in my heart I was doing what was best for my kids and not me. And that's what good moms do, right? For the best interest of the kids, I would keep custody with him and share everything with him and all of that. But the kids remained with him. And it devastated me. I mean, like nothing ever had. And a lot of things had tried. Once again, I was wrecked. But it was a divorce, and someone had to leave. And that someone was me. And I left everything. I got in a 1984 motorhome. And on June 10th, 2005, I drove away from my marriage, my life, my things, and my children. My 14-year-old son and my 10-year-old daughter. And to top it all off, remember, I had no real family left. So where would I go? Life was proving again no one wanted me. So I drove to the one friend that seemed to understand. He was a man I had met playing Scrabble online. I was in Michigan and he was in Missouri. But I was broken and devastated and had nowhere else to go. So I drove here, and long story short, 4 months later, John and I were married. But he was broken too. And addiction was a part of his story. Shattered, I laid in the back of that motorhome for a whole year, crying, drinking, and doing drugs, and getting up only to do what I had to, like Skype with my kids or do some parent-teacher conference online. I just did what I had to. Somehow try to survive this. Somehow decide I wanted to live. And I believed the enemy again. He could get to me anytime, anywhere, anyway, and there was nothing I could do about it. So I began drinking for comfort and peace and for the release of things I wanted to forget. I wanted to check out and forget so bad. So I would make 1 raspberry margarita, just 1, but then I would down the whole bottle of tequila on repeat every night. New husband on board with his whiskey. Fear, hate, shame, foreboding, alone, and now regret entered the picture. What a gang, huh? Turns out I really did have a gang family. But this one, I wouldn't leave. I wouldn't leave me alone. I woke up one morning in the back of that camper in a pile of pink puke from the raspberry margarita, and I screamed into the air a third plea. God, if you are real, for Christ's sake, help me. I said it as a cuss, but the words I screamed out suddenly hit me. For Christ's sake, help me. It wasn't a cuss, it was a prayer. For Christ's sake, not mine, for Christ's. And I started reflecting on that, and somehow, I don't know how brains work, but somehow all of a sudden I remembered the meaning of my name. What is it? Rejoice. And it connected dots. I don't know why. I don't know how a split second of thinking like that can turn something around, but God used it in that moment, and I remember it just as vividly as I remembered that burning chair with the sunset behind it when I was 3. It was the moment that I let God, not the enemy, meet me in my story and flipped the script. This whole life, this whole messed up life was no surprise to God. Ephesians 1:4 tells us that God stood on the other side of creation before the beginning of time and called out our name. He called us by name. He knew what the timeline of my life was going to look like and everything it was going to hold. And he said, I still want you, Kay. I'm calling you by name, and your name means rejoice. Scripture says he called out our name. In Greek, that calling out is eklegos. Now, has anybody here ever stepped on a Lego? You know exactly what you stepped on. You know exactly what you stepped on. And you call that name out because it hurts. And that's what this word means, actually. It's a calling out as an absolute knowing. Unmistakable, assured, for sure, and yelled like you mean it kind of calling. The short of it is, I got up from the back of that motorhome and I washed my face and I washed my hair and I got back to, for Christ's sake. I've lived this life, this timeline for a purpose, and it's his, for such a time as this. It's to go through the fire and come out bringing buckets of water for other people. I knew about recovery. My addicted husband dabbled with AA, but I found a Christ-centered one, and the 12 steps with Jesus at the forefront changed my life. Changed. No longer chained. I was free. Galatians 5:1, screaming my freedom. It is for freedom Christ came to set us free. Step 1, I had to admit I was powerless and my life was out of control. But step 2 came in hot on its heels and promised me that God was going to restore me. So I dove in. I went through process groups, but I'll be honest, I never wrote anything down in a booklet or a journal. And I got very involved with recovery, my own first, and then as a leader. I started going back into prisons to teach it and lead it and preach at chapels with 1,400 incarcerated women, as well as those in recovery homes on the outside. 7 years I did this, and I thought I was all in. But when my new husband wasn't thrilled with the all in, I started to tone down my enthusiasm to make him and some other people comfortable. I tried to just please them. Can you say codependency? And people pleasing? Earlier this year, after almost 20 years, that marriage dissolved. I never really saw it coming, and honest, the enemy tried to use it to keep the lies and the habits and the hang-ups and the traumas fresh again. But God. I reached out to the only Christ-centered recovery program I knew that was left in my area, and Chaplain Chris answered. And I hung up on him. I hung up and I claimed, wrong number. But God stayed at work and he said, you're going through this again and you're doing the steps. You're doing the work this time. You're writing it down. Journal them. This time, do the work at the deepest level you possibly can. Okay, that's all in. That's all in. So go all in, and let me remind you the meaning of your name again. It's rejoice. So I called Chris again. I was ready to take a drink. I was ready to throw away 14 years sober, and I was ready to run like my childhood had taught me. But this time I was more ready to believe God than I ever had been before. And I did. I went all in. I've told Chris this. I'm glad he answered that second phone call. The second phone call is what saved my life. He kept me from drinking. He encouraged me to come to that group. And now, I help co-lead it. God brought me through so much. He's not about to stop now. I'm not doing things perfectly, and yet he's not abandoning. Most people have this core need of love, and I guess I probably do too. I know I do. But the one that still raises its hand for me first is safe. And don't leave me. Keep me safe. Don't leave me, and don't make me be alone. And God is keeping his promises to me. I'm not standing up here because I'm getting it all right. I'm standing up here because I've learned how to recover. and it is with Jesus. And he is the solid in all of this. And he never leaves. And he's redeeming more. Remember the trauma caused by the motorcycle gangs in my childhood? Remember how just the sound would send me into panic? He redeemed that. He took back what the enemy stole just this year. And now I have my own license, and I ride with a community of bikers, Broken Chains, who have found help and healing and hope through Jesus Christ, through the process of Christ-centered recovery, showing others and telling others through him change is possible. It's called Broken Chains, and I'm here to tell you, my chains are broken. September 29th of this year, I stood in a pool at a Broken Chains event at the Fall Unity Gathering in Arkansas. I was going to get baptized, rededicate my life, and run all in this time with Jesus, once and for all. And the backstory of it is a little mind-blowing. I had sat at lunch with a brother named Jay and Chris, and Jay, he's also a chaplain. He's North Central chaplain for Broken Chains. He lives in Michigan. And after talking, not only were we from the same place in Michigan, but he knew and revealed things to me about my motorcycle club family that I didn't understand as a child or that I didn't know as a child, but that I always wondered. He knew them. He knew the name of my family's business. He knew that it wasn't an official business, but a front. I mean, Chris is here as witness. He knew things. It took 50 years, I'm 58, took 50 years and a Broken Chains event and a man from my hometown sitting with me at lunch in a state neither one of us were from for truth to drop. I was made for such a time as this. God saw me. He knew me. He arranged that moment before the foundations of the earth. He arranged the moment before this timeline. He stood on the other side of creation before there was even a world to put me in. And he said, I'm coming for you. It's going to take Jesus and the cross, but I'm coming for you. He knew everything that was coming. I asked Jay to come to the baptism and pray over the water, and he said, absolutely. The water stirred after he prayed. We weren't even in the pool yet, but it started moving. Again, Chris is witness to this because he baptized me. Not a wind was blowing. Nothing was making that water move except what Jay had prayed over. Chaplain Chris and I entered the freezing water, and it was freezing. And as he was about to baptize me, suddenly the fence gate around the pool opened, and I had just watched Jay pull it shut. And not just gently, like he pulled that shut, but it opened. And then it slammed shut. And Chris said, spirits are leaving. When we came out of the water, we were so hot. Freezing water, and we were on fire. We were so hot. Our legs feeling like they were on fire. And as Jay and Chris prayed over me, I spoke in tongues, and I didn't even know that I was. I told the guys, I'm going to ask God to reveal to me who left that gate. Who left? That night, I had to give my testimony at our own recovery meeting, and I started to cry because suddenly I knew who had left. It was a gang, not the motorcycle clubs and the one percenters that I had grew up with, afraid of and traumatized by, but it was that gang. That gang who told me they weren't going to leave. That gang that formed when I was a child. It was the gang of fear and hate and shame and foreboding and aloneness and regret. And the liar himself slammed that gate shut because he knew he lost. That gang left. Listen, friends, if God can take and redeem my story, my life, my addictions, my traumas, my hurts, my habits, my hang-ups, he can redeem yours too. And I'm here to deal you that hope. Around here it says I'm a hope dealer. The back of my hat says I'm a hope dealer. Broken chains, we're hope dealers, and I'm here to deal you that hope. He saw me before there was a world to put me in. He knew my timeline, and he put a cross between me and the calling out of my name. He said, anytime your hurt, your hang-up, your habit, your trauma rises up and tells you that it's got you, you take it back to the cross. You pick it up and you take it back to the cross. That's recover. The cross covered your timeline. Jesus, what he did on the cross covered what God already knew was coming. And he said, it's covered. But that word in front of it, that actually means do it again. Do it again. Because we're not perfect. We're not always going to get it right, are we? I still go to foreboding. The beginning of this, I told you, that's one of the things I still struggle with. The other shoe's always going to drop. Do it again. Recover. 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 You take it back to the cross over and over. You guys, if he did that for me, he'll do it for you. He saw you too. He stood on the other side of the world before there was a place to put you, and he saw you too. And he said, I'm coming for you too. Your story is his story. It's not just your history. My favorite verse is Song of Solomon 8:5. It's somewhere back here. And it says, who is this? Who is this coming up out of the wilderness, leaning on her beloved? Who is this? She was so unrecognizable from being in the wilderness with her beloved that they didn't know who she was. Who is this? Let them know him because of the difference they see in me coming out of my wilderness. Because of Christ and the 12 steps in Christ-centered recovery, I'm different. Hope is real and change is possible. And now I just want to walk out. No, I want to run with step 12, which is to carry the message to others. Because Christ-centered recovery equals changed, not chained. My chains are broken. Hi, my name is Kay, and it means rejoice. So I'm going to go live it that way.
Thanks for listening. Please comment and subscribe for upcoming podcasts. To order your copy of My Real Life, go to the Take Action page at our website, reallifeministries-stl.com, or go to Real Life Ministries STL on Facebook.